All right. Well, welcome everyone. We are so glad you could join us today. Our topic of the workshop today is designing AI embracing research assignments. And Brittany Davis will be guiding us through that today. Brittany?
Thank you, Lisa. So welcome, everyone. My name is Brittany Davis. I work at Eastern Kentucky University as a research and instruction librarian. I want to kind of preface this presentation with saying that I am a STEM and psychology librarian. So I am learning along with everybody else about all the AI things. I am by no means an AI expert, but it is definitely something the library here as a whole and the university is keeping track of and keeping up with. And it is just, a piece of the future that we're going to have to prepare our students for adequately. And the research assignment realm is kind of where I'm focusing my attention as a librarian. Okay, so let's kind of hop right into it and hope that this will move. There we go. Okay, so what are we going to do today, kind of quickly at a glance? We're going to talk a little bit about information literacy and how really, AI literacy is just a piece of information literacy. So librarians have been teaching, about 6 different tenets to get folks to where they can be information literate and understand, the value of information and searching and all that type of stuff. And so AI is just kind of another piece of that. And we're going to walk you through that through the lens of a research assignment, so you can kind of see where AI can fit at different parts in the research process, because as we all know, research is not linear. You search for your sources, you get your topic, you readjust, you look at the literature. So there's a lot of different opportunities to have an AI tool ethically kind of embrace and enhance that a little bit. We're also going to talk a little bit about the different types of AI tools. So different AIs are built for different things, right? A lot of folks are kind of getting used to getting more, familiar with things like ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, that type of thing. And those are what's called LLMs. And we're also going to take a look at kind of the other side of that, kind of where I lean a little more towards, which are the RAG models. And we're going to go through and define all that and the differences and that type of thing. But just quickly at a glance, that's what we're going to do. We're going to get a little bit of practice kind of looking at, how do you break down what piece of the research assignment we're in and where are your opportunities for AI. Okay, very quickly, because I'm not going to kind of bore you with the nerdy librarian stuff, but just to give you a little context as we begin this discussion. So the Association of College and Research Libraries is kind of helps us build our standards around information literacy and how we measure an information literate student, an information literate individual, right? And so there are about 6 different tenets for that. And just very super quickly, as I go down this list, so authority is constructed and contextual. That one basically is we're kind of measuring and teaching to the idea that there are varying levels of credibility based upon your information need and based upon your discipline. So what that kind of looks like in practice is, a lot of our, EKU has a very big like fire and safety program. And so their kind of gold standard is not always the scholarly articles. A lot of the times it's trade publications, because they are writing based upon very applicable real world experience that they have in that position, and they're training people through that venue. So that's a little bit about what that one is. Information creation as a process, that one really speaks to kind of the format, and the way that information is shared is really determined by the audience. And so if you kind of look at, the way that a newspaper is formatted, the language, the way it's advertised, that's very much for a specific audience. And if you're going to use that, you need to understand why that's important. Information has value. So there are, different types of information have different value depending on the information need. Again, blogs, articles, like just because it's not a scholarly article doesn't mean it may not have a place in the conversation. Some topics are so new, you may only be able to find a blog written by a psychologist about that topic, right? So there's more nuance to research, than a lot of beginner researchers realize. Research as inquiry is a little bit about, your initial question typically develops as you research. You have an idea, you have a question that you want to learn more about, and then you do a search and you see what's already out there. And that kind of informs how your question will shift a little bit. Okay. Scholarship is conversation. That one's a little bit about, the community that's built around scholarship and around publishing. I think a lot of times our students don't realize you don't create in a vacuum, right? There are folks that are interested in the same type of research. And so how does that affect how you're going to be a part, how the student is going to be a part of that conversation? And lastly, searching as strategic exploration. That's pretty much kind of what I was talking about earlier. Research is a process. It is not, I find a source, I summarize it, I write a thing, I'm done. It has very different ways where you kind of come back and you readjust at different levels. And so AI really just kind of adds another layer of conversation to each of these frames. There's a place where it can be inserted in each of these. I'm going to give a couple examples. I don't have quite enough time to hit each frame today, but we are going to walk through, again, something very specific to give you a kind of a practical application. Okay. So I put this in here because everybody has different varying levels of experience with different AI. So what I did was I asked ChatGPT, and this has been probably 4 or 5 months ago, so it would probably do a little better if I asked it today. I asked it, what is an LLM AI? What does that mean? A large language model is what that stands for. And it basically is going to tell you, it's a text predictor. So it is good at looking at a phrase and predicting what is the most common thing that would be said after that phrase, right? So the example, I asked it to explain it to me like I was 5. The example that it gave was, if you were to tell somebody, once upon a time, the AI is going to know most likely that the next part is going to be about a princess, a dragon, an adventure. It's not going to be like, once upon a time, I wrote a scholarly article about. It's going to know that that does not match, right? So it's making textual predictions. So it's important to kind of know what's happening on the back end. And it's important for your students to know that it's not, it's not a critical thinker. It's not really having a conversation. It's built around that mode of communication, but it's not really how it's working. So I like to kind of start with just kind of a basic definition. And then we're going to take a look at a couple of example research assignments that we're going to walk through. Okay, how does this normally look, and how will this look with an AI embedded in? And so a little bit of a disclaimer. I would definitely recommend, sitting down and kind of fleshing out these assignments. We do that a lot here at Eastern, where we sit down with faculty and we say, okay, this is your research assignment. Let's see what we can do to kind of scaffold it for your students. But for today's purposes, for the simplicity of it, we're going to kind of use these two. So a lot of times what I initially look at is the purpose, is the why. What are we trying to get students to learn? What is the end goal? And that's where I start and kind of work a little bit backwards to see, okay, which frames is this hitting for us for information literacy, and where can an AI be embedded in that to kind of help students remember, to help students understand why that's important a little bit better. Okay. So I've highlighted the purpose here. So the first one's talking about tracing the development of an idea through scholarly literature to gain a better understanding of how ideas evolve and make a work seminal to a discipline, which is, paramount for a student to understand as they progress through their career. And the second one's talking a little bit about becoming proficient at locating sources of information by efficiently searching scholarly tools, another valuable piece that they're going to have to know as they go through college. And so this kind of hits, scholarship is conversation. They're talking about what makes a work seminal, how people are sharing ideas. Research is inquiry is definitely in here as they're learning to search and they're kind of absorbing that information, and searching as strategic exploration because they're going to have to go in and search and figure out how to get their keywords right. They're doing all that stuff, right? So typically, the typical research process, they're going to search. They're going to kind of move through, how do they get keywords? How do you find a source? How do you evaluate that source? And, they're going to start to hopefully understand that you don't create in a vacuum. Okay. So I asked the LLM just to see, where would an AI fit here? I asked an LLM a research question, right? That was kind of like, okay, what about rural areas? What are the barriers to healthy food? I think is what I asked it for this one. And so you can kind of see it gives a brief overview. And I think this is something a student might do to just kind of be like, okay, I need help. What can I put for this type of question, this type of assignment. And so it gives a couple things. It talks about research methodologies. It talks about emerging areas of research. It's got kind of a good overview here. But if you really kind of flip back and look at, the purpose, is this helping them become more proficient? No, because it's not really searching a scholarly tool. And it's also not really helping them track through scholarly literature or seeing how ideas evolve. It's really just doing an overview, right? Which is not exactly meeting the purpose. However, a lot of times we teach students, you can't put the cart before the horse. You have to understand your topic before you really dig into the databases. The more you know about your topic, the better your keywords are going to be. And the keywords are the key to the databases, right? And so I think one of the main tenets here that's missing is that it does not provide sources, right? You have no idea where it's pulling this information from. ChatGPT and the other LLMs are getting a little better at telling you where stuff comes from, but they still do what's called hallucinating, which basically means they are scraping together what would look like a really good journal article. And maybe even the journal exists, but the title does not exist. The authors are a little wonky. It's going to look real, but it may not exactly be an actual article. But the student won't know that unless they kind of do a little lateral reading and come out and search for that specific thing. They're just going to say, oh, okay, that looks right. That looks like a scholarly article. So there's place here to talk about, why this isn't good for sources. But it is good usually to look for an overview, to look at, especially for if you think about our history majors, a lot of that terminology is dependent upon people, like the people in time that were in the wars. Depends upon dates. It depends upon a lot of, certain countries were named different things depending on the era that you're talking about it. And maybe a beginner researcher, that's a lot for them to wrap their head around initially. And so it's missing sources. It's not really doing, what the assignment has asked, but it's a decent starting place because it's going to let them kind of take a breath and look at, oh, okay, this is kind of what I'm interested in. I can pull some keywords out of this a little bit. It helps me understand a little better, right? So that was kind of the initial search I did. So just kind of to summarize that, in general, again, and this can change tomorrow because AI changes about every day, right? So in general, an LLM for research, something it is decent at, is good for background research. It gives kind of an easy to understand overview of most topics because it is doing the thing where it's scraping the internet and it's looking through lots of different things, and it's kind of putting that in a place that makes it easier for the student, a little less cognitive overload, right? It's just giving you like a quick conversational piece, right? The conversational nature also allows for a little bit of nuance. So if finding opposing viewpoints can be a little easier, you can just ask the AI, hey, okay, what is the opposite argument for this? I think that's something else that students struggle with. What is the, counterpoint for this argument? What is the entire picture here? Where is the bias lying? It can help a little bit with that.
Britt, we do have one
Yes.
question.
Sure. Shoot.
Claire says, one ongoing question I have is how to talk with students about the limitations of the training data. What happens if the topic you're researching is not well represented in the training data? Can you still trust the overview? For example, my research is focused on LGBTQ communities and yikes, all caps.
Yes. So as most of us in higher education are aware, there are some political things happening around that particular topic that is removing information that has been available to us across different areas of information. And so I think it's important, up front to talk about, because of the way that the LLM is trained, because it is scraping data from websites, and some of these websites are down now, they're gone, right? It makes it that much harder for it to really get a full picture. It's not going to be able to pull an entire piece of it. But that's also another conversation to be had about, because the training set is gone now, right? Because that's where your bias comes in with these a lot of the times, is it will weight different types of websites or different types of information in different ways. And so because this has just inevitably been weighted less because the websites have been pulled, it is not going to have as much nuanced information. So maybe it's a place to be like, oh, okay, these are some general things, and then have a conversation with your students like, what do you think is missing? Now let's hit the databases and see, oh, okay, that's clearly been taken out. This aspect of that community has been removed, and this is why we still have to pair them, right? You can't just do AI. You can't just do, the live. You need to kind of do a little bit of both. Okay.
Claire says thank you.
Perfect. All right. So another kind of little good thing about the LLMs is that it is talking to them kind of like a peer, right? It is not super filled with scientific jargon. It's not, talking down to them. Like they feel a little more comfortable, I think, asking the AI questions because there's not that authority piece there. They can ask a dumb, quote unquote, dumb question, and it will explain it to them like it's just a question, it's just a conversation. And like I mentioned before, once they get a good overview of that topic, they can help, the AI can even help say, okay, this is what I'm interested in. I'm interested in this aspect of this overview that you gave me of this topic. Can you help me brainstorm 10 keywords that maybe I could use in a database? And so it's helping them, yes, it's helping them bridge that gap a little bit. Go.
So speaking of keywords, Andy asked, to follow the previous question, are there any keywords so we can trick the LLM to provide the answer we need?
Depends on the answer you want.
Andy, feel free to come off mute. What are you looking for specifically, or have you run into situations like this?
Yeah, I'm super curious.
The thing is that right now I actually have a conference that I'm going to be I'm going to be a speaker in that conference, and the thing is that because because this changes all the time, I honestly have changed it like 10 times already.
Yes.
So I'm freaking out a little bit because I really want to give real value to whoever is going to come, even if it's just one person. I'm going to be just flattered that that person came, right? So the thing is that I'm really curious because my focus is always it's always on ESL and the linguistic aspect of how we naturally communicate with large language models. So I do understand that the more specific we are with our words, as it should have happened, with our human communication anyways, is there like any ways that we can sort of like trick the large language model in a way that actually give us exactly what we need, or at least closer to that, in a way that I can help my student to get there and use basically the AI in a way that it should be used, right? I don't know if I got the question across. Yes?
No, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
Battlefield.
Yeah, no, you're fine. That's something a lot of people struggle with. And because they do update very frequently, the training data updates it frequently, it's hard to kind of have a one-stop shop for that, right? I think the good general advice I would give, and I'll even let Lisa answer because Lisa experiments probably more than I do with it. But I think the general answer I would give is to kind of focus on, like you said, context and and being specific. And so what I mean by that is like, tell your students, give it as much information as you're comfortable with, because we know it is tracking this, right? So tell them, I'm an undergraduate student at a rural university in my freshman ESL class or whatever class it is. I need help with formulating my research topic. I am interested in, whatever the topic is, salamanders and their habitats, whatever it happens to be. Can you help me understand how habitats affect salamanders and give me a few keywords to help me when I get to the database? So give it very specific. And the other thing I might recommend is kind of give it your context, right? And do one question at a time. Don't bombard it all at once. Give it a chance to kind of process like the context, do a question, let it answer that, and then do it slower, slow it down a little bit.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm really glad to see that we're actually on the same page, because I really hate to bombard the large language model. And actually, I like to do this scaffold model, but in pieces, not in just one go. So I found that it has been much more effective that way. So thank you. This actually takes the pressure off a lot. So thanks.
Well, that's awesome. So something else, anytime you can get the reasoning models to work through something step by step, or even with the non-reasoning models. Think through this logically, provide the steps. Anything to invoke that chain of thought reasoning to get it to break it down. And then, we've always got Ethan Mollick's Now is the Time for Grimoires. That's an excellent article to go back and read if you haven't read that lately. And then Google DeepMind researchers were trying to figure out how to get Gemini to be better at mathematical responses. And of all the crazy things, they found that asking the LLM to take a deep breath, then work this step by step. Sometimes the prompts to get, exactly. The prompts we use to get the desired results don't really make a lot of sense to us. And so, there's always this argument, do we need prompt engineers, or is prompt engineering going away? So to catch up on the chat, thank you, Andy, for that question. That's a very pertinent question. Kelly, wonderful resource as always. Thank you for this. Kelly posted in the chat that she asked the question, if government websites or resources have been taken down, how do you find it? So we've got the Wayback Machine, Google Cache, local library. Go ahead, Kelly.
That's what ChatGPT recommended. I said,
Yes.
if government websites have been taken down and that's the kind of unbiased data that I want and it's no longer there, how can you, help me find that kind of data? And that's what it said.
So it's getting pretty good. It's at least recognizing like there is a place for this.
And then John Ippolito asked, I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on retrieval augmented generation, given that LGBTQ sites taken down recently will not be available for RAG, but are still baked into the training data for some existing models. We may get to that later.
We'll talk a little bit about that, yes. And it is another conversation about they have pulled some things that RAG models don't pull from the whole scholarly literature. So that's a conversation that's going to have to be wrapped into it anyway. But yes, that's a very good point. Okay.
All right, we're all caught up. Thank you so much.
Are we good? Of course. No, of course. I want it to be, like I said, it's a discussion. We're all learning all the time.
Yes.
Okay.
Fabulous.
All right. So a couple of the cons, we already kind of talked about this. You all are kind of familiar with it. LLMs can hallucinate, right? Sometimes they don't get the sources right. Sometimes they don't get the information right. They cannot pull thus far directly from a subscription-based database. There are a couple of different models out there that are doing the deep research. They're trying to make contracts with publishers and vendors, but that's not exactly been leveled yet. So they also cannot evaluate the credibility of sources, like we talked about earlier. For an example, it may treat a blog with the same level of weight as it would a government website. So it may think, oh, this blog seems to fit the way that you've asked me this question better. And so that's the source I'm going to give you, as opposed to this government website, which would probably have a little more credibility. But that one I'm either not going to give you, or it's going to be really far down the bottom. But again, just because it's a con doesn't mean it's still not teachable. So a lot of times we will teach the students, don't take it at face value, do a little lateral reading, come out and kind of fact checked basically what the AI is giving you. And that is a cross the board skill that we teach in information literacy, regardless of if it's in AI or not. So it's just something they need. Okay. So quick example here, and let's hope when I click on this that the screen does what it's supposed to. The three things I generally recommend using LLM models for when you're talking about research assignments and kind of the research process is, again, the background research. Let it give you a little bit of an overview. Let it help you bridge that gap of like, they're so used to searching in Google and getting like the top 2 results to like databases don't work that way. You really got to have the keywords, and you really got to do a deeper dive so that brainstorming keywords can kind of help them make that jump a little easier. And it can also even help you brainstorm search strategies for databases. So, a lot of the databases require you to put in the keywords in a very specific way, one concept per box, synonyms in the same box. It can kind of help with that too. It can help push that out. So let me give you all this example here that I've got. Lisa, let me know. Should be a Google worksheet. Is it good? Okay. So this again is just a very kind of basic, like foundational, get them into, what is it, Lisa? Is it good?
Can you zoom it just a little bit so we can read it?
Yes. Yes. Thank you. No, you're good. Is that a little better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay. So again, this is a very kind of basic introduction to how you can enhance a research assignment with AI. But again, I recommend that you bring whatever your research assignment is to your librarian so you can really have more nuance in it. This is more of a very broad approach to it to get them used to the tool and to get them used to some of our concepts of like lateral reading. Why is that important? Why do you have to fact check the AI? That type of thing. But again, if you're just kind of looking for, can I get kind of a place to start? This is kind of a good introduction. But, I've worked with 2 or 3 different professors that they've brought me their specific assignment and they say, this is where students are struggling. And I say, oh, how do you feel about an AI? That can help with the keyword part of this if that's where they're struggling, right? So it really, really helps to kind of have that one-on-one conversation. Okay. And all of this is in Lisa's wonderful swag bag link stuff, so you all have access to this. I won't bore you with the details. All right. So in general, some folks, the ChatGPT has been around long enough now. I think a lot of us have gotten in and played with the APIs. So it's kind of like a list of apps, if you want to think of it that way, that you can kind of go into. Scholar GPT does a little bit better than just regular GPT. If they're going to do research in here, again, I don't recommend it for source pulling. It's still not good at that. GPT is just not fantastic at that. But if you want to do a comparison of the different models, this is a good way to do that. You can hit Explore GPTs. It'll take you here, and they kind of list it through like trending, what's by ChatGPT, what's good at writing, what's good at productivity, yada, yada, yada. You'll see Scholar is the 3rd most trending because students do struggle with, finding research and how do you make that transition from I can Google it to like the databases are very specific. And so it'll tell you, yeah, this is what I am, this is what we do. And it looks very similar, but you'll see it's pulling from different places than just regular ChatGPT does. It's not strictly just the internet. Okay. Perplexity is another option. It's privately owned. Oh, interesting. Okay, so this one looks very similar, except it typically will put the sources at the top. So you can ask it something like, what are the concerns for, health concerns for areas, just kind of a general topic that, a beginner researcher might be looking at. And it will give you where it's getting its stuff at the top. And you'll see this one's pulling a little more from like, okay, the CDC is a little more reputable. It's pulling from PubMed, the National Institutes of Health, that type of thing. Again, all the LLMs need to be fact checked just as a general rule. And then Claude, which is Anthropic's. Can tell I'm not logged into it today. How dare I? Go, go, go. Okay. You can do the same thing. And what I actually like to do with students is to have them do 2 or 3 and to do a comparison of like, well, why is Claude telling me this? Why is ChatGPT telling me this? Why is Perplexity and why is it pulling from different sources, right? How does that play into how information is created and disseminated? Okay. All right. So for the sake of time here, let's keep trucking. Okay. So the next type of model that we're going to talk about is the retrieval augmented generation types of models. Okay. And I did kind of the similar type of thing. I asked, what is this model? Why is it different? What's it good for? Type of thing. So the RAG models are better at pulling from a specific knowledge base. And the couple that I'm going to show you today, again, because I'm looking in the research vein, are geared more towards pulling from open access scholarly articles. That way you're not getting hallucinations quite so frequently because it's not kind of scraping the internet anymore. It's got a very specific set of data that it's pulling from. So we kind of go back and remind ourselves of, this is the assignment. This is the purpose of the assignment. Again, looking at how do you develop ideas, looking at how do you get better at searching, that type of thing. One of the ones that a lot of faculty actually really enjoy, but I think is important also for the students to take a look at, is one called Connected Papers. And Connected Papers, we'll take a look at, okay, so you'll see here in the purple, this is kind of the article that I searched for. I kind of looked at heart healthy diets, and it'll take a look at, okay, what is in that similar vein? Who are the authors and where does it kind of fit in the big kind of scholarship community and how it's being kind of related to each other. And so this one would really be helpful for that first assignment, for that first purpose of, oh, okay, this is how I can track, okay, well, this article cited this article, and then that's how we got to this article. And then, you know, how do I go from here? What's my piece in this conversation, right? So that one's actually, again, a lot of faculty like that one because you can kind of track the literature through on particular topics. However, again, most of these cannot breach paywall currently. And so this is pulling from more of your PubMeds, your National Institutes of Health, that type of thing, the ones that are open access. There's a couple of different models right now, and the one that I'm really going to focus on today is SciSpace. This one is probably the one when I show students, it clicks for them almost immediately. This one combines what we kind of phrase as natural language processing. So it works a lot like Google. I can just type a research question in. As you can see here, I was just like, okay, I'm interested in how healthy diets in rural areas. I did something very broad, and it gave me a way to ask a research question, which I think is something a lot of novice researchers struggle with getting. Like, okay, I'm interested in this kind of vaguely, but SciSpace is really geared towards the researcher and is kind of helping them try to make that mental connection of, oh, okay, well, what about this are you interested in? What about healthy diets in rural areas? Are you interested in the barriers and how that can be addressed? Are you interested in how there might be a little bit of limited access and how that affects well-being overall? So it's getting them more in that researcher mindset of not just like, you know, I want to look at diets, or I want to look at, you know, rural areas. It's getting them a little more focused in initially. And SciSpace works a little bit better when you can kind of feed it a research question. It's kind of geared towards that mindset. So let's take a look and see. Once you kind of search, it's going to do something a little similar to the LLMs. It's going to give you that brief overview. The main difference with this type of model is that its sources are here immediately. They're clickable, and they're also down here in this table, okay? And so that is kind of the huge turning point, especially for that second purpose in the assignment of looking at, you know, help me find articles, help me trace articles, and it's giving insights, practical implications, findings. It's really doing kind of a literature review matrix for you that you can customize beneath here. And I'll pull SciSpace up so you all can kind of see the big picture here, because this is kind of a smaller screenshot. But I would argue that this particular type of model, because of the way it is designed and because of the way that it's user-friendly and it's the tools that are embedded, is working a little bit better to meet the purpose of those research assignments, right? So let's pull down and let you all come out and look at SciSpace real quick. Okay. Right. So you can see I've searched for multiple different things here. Let's do something basic here. We'll do something again. Healthy diet in rural areas. Okay. It's going to give you a few options here. It does take a little more time to think about what it's giving you. Okay. So it will tell you answer from the top 5 papers. I always caution students when I show SciSpace that top is a relative term. It's like saying it's the best TV on the market, because it's only pulling from, again, a smaller portion of the scholarly picture, right? It's not getting past the paywall. So the top 5 is the top 5 it has access to. So that's, again, take that bit of it with a grain of salt, but it is telling you, okay, here's kind of a overview of what you asked me. Here are the articles for that. And here they are listed in the table. And you can kind of customize this literature review matrix basically. And you can say, what are the insights to each of these? Can you help me with the keywords for each of these so that I can go into the databases that, you know, my school pays for and have better luck that way? I can get more articles and more literature that I need that way. You can even kind of take a look at, okay, what were the limitations? What were the research gaps? What were the variables, independent and dependent? And so I think especially for students that have those bigger research projects, this really helps kind of get their brain in a place of like, oh, okay, this is kind of the basics of these articles at a glance. And this is going to help them determine, oh, okay, this is the one I want to read, or maybe this is the one I want to read, or okay, maybe this isn't the question I need to ask, right? Because this still isn't getting me what I want. So I need to go back up and look and see, okay, I need to look at a different variable. So a lot of students look at this as kind of like a brain break for their brain to kind of have a place to have this type of organization that they maybe would have struggled to do on their own. It also has a neat ability for students. Once you click into one, so a lot of our students, you know, sometimes all that text is overwhelming. It can turn this into a podcast, kind of like an audio summary, and that works pretty well in general. But it can also chat with the paper. And so I caution students to use this, you know, sparingly, like, and it will give you options of like, can you summarize it? Like, what are the contributions? Can you help me understand results? And so this is, you'll probably notice this is LLM technology here, but it is only programmed for this article. It is only pulling answers from this article. Okay. And so it'll give you a little bit of an overview. And I always caution students, you know, you are still the critical thinker here. The AI can help you. It can help you with language, with lingo, with kind of those higher scientific things. It can help you a little bit in that area so that you can wrap your head around it, but you are still going to have to understand it at a level to where you can synthesize it for your project. This will not be enough. This is a tool to help you get there. And a lot of students use this. I see them, they'll read their articles and they'll be like, well, I don't really understand this piece of it. And so they'll ask, what does this sentence mean in the results? And it kind of helps, again, this way of communicating, this very natural language communication helps them feel like, oh, okay, that's what that meant. And that's why this matters for this piece of the paper that I'm writing or their project that they're doing.
All right, Britt, we've got a great question from Shirley. Thinking about,
of course, Shirley.
So thinking about transparency, when students use SciSpace like this, do they need to cite it?
I recommend, if you are having conversations with your students about AI, having sanctioned uses of AI. And so you can tell them you can use SciSpace, but I want to know what you asked it. I want to know what the answer it gave you. And then I want to know how you used that to improve your critical thinking. So make it about both. Does that make sense, Shirley?
Good.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. That works.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Let's pop back over here. Back in here. Okay. All right. So a little bit again, pros and cons, kind of the same thing we did for the LLMs. So the pros, for the most part, the hallucinations are significantly decreased. It very rarely will hallucinate because it is pulling from a knowledge set. Now, the other half of that coin is kind of like how we talked about, if we know that they are pulling certain topics from open access articles like LGBTQ, there is going to be a bias there. So maybe not a hallucination, but maybe not an entire story being told, basically. And so at that point, you're going to have to say, okay, we're going to have to, combine these. We're going to see what is available through this tool, why these things are not available and why that matters, and then come into something like Medline and look and see, oh, okay, this changes that conversation entirely. And why does it matter what access to information means across the board, right? It's a very good way to look at information literacy and how you need to critically think about why does that matter that that's not in this tool anymore. The column feature helps speed up the research process. Again, that just really helps kind of the cognitive overload when you think about, a lot of the students I meet with in research appointments are just really overwhelmed. They've got a lot going on, not only academically, but a lot of times, personally. We serve a lot of first gen students here and they have a lot on their plate. And so something that can kind of get their head in a space where they're less anxious will help their learning in general. And so that's kind of been helpful for students from what I've heard for feedback wise. And again, the chat feature can help students understand those more complex topics and areas of ideas. They're not discipline experts typically at this point. And so that helps them make those connections.
Quick question, Britt.
Yep.
How much does SciSpace cost?
SciSpace is free to a point. It used to be a little freer than it is now, but they are all kind of moving generally in that direction, right? Capitalism. And so I think you can do a handful of searches, and they've also got like a deep research feature like a lot of the models are doing now. And so there's a handful that you can do just like I showed you, to where it's doing the overview, the table, the chat. But there is going to be a point where it's going to hit where it's going to say, well, you can only do so many for the next hour, or you can only do so many, for the next couple days. So there is a little bit of a limitation with that.
Great. What about the other options you mentioned? What are their costs?
The other ones that I've got in here, so Consensus, I think, is also free up into a point. And I think its limits are a little bit smaller. So you can only do maybe 2 per hour or something like that. I've not played with them enough to remember like the actual numbers, but they all have a point to where it's going to be like, oh, okay. And I think some of these models are less about locking you out entirely. Like, for example, if you ask ChatGPT right now in the free version to create images, it'll only let you do 2 or 3 before it locks you out of doing that for the day. And a lot of the RAG models will just kind of, they don't lock you out, but they're not going to be as nuanced. They're not going to have as much detail to it. And it will tell you, I can only provide so much information. Yeah. In this hour, in this next 2 hours, right?
Sure. Fantastic. And you're using Claude free also?
Yes, all of that. For now, I am trying to kind of teach to what I assume the students will have access to until
Sure.
we have an institutional thing that we are aligned with.
Very good. Thank you, Britt.
You're very welcome. Okay. Cons, again, we talked about this a little bit. It can't breach the paywall for subscription databases. But again, it's a con, it's not a con, right? Like, use it in conjunction, start kind of with your AI and then talk about, okay, this is why this is still important. Like, a lot of your articles that you're going to get are still going to be in the library databases, and tools like SciSpace, again, can help you understand the scientific language, can help you see how the researchers are talking about your topic. And that's also helpful for keyword mining. So again, it's really about the conversations you get to have with your students about how the tool can be used ethically.
Great. Another
Okay.
question. Can this research strategy of starting with RAG AI, almost went to AGI there, RAG AI also apply to faculty research? Or would you recommend following up with normal database research?
I would probably do the same recommendation. You do both. I mean, a lot of times, even librarians run into walls. We don't, somebody brings me something about the Bolsheviks in Russia and the 1800s, and I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so, yeah, so it can be used in conjunction. So while I do know a lot about searching databases, history is not my area. And so I might go to something like SciSpace or Consensus and be like, this is what I'm interested in, and just glance through, make it do the keyword thing, make it do the implications, and see, oh, okay, this is how these concepts are connected. And this is maybe a different word I can use in the databases. Because again, RAG is not going to pull the whole scholarly map. It's pulling a subset because it cannot reach paywall.
Awesome. Thank you.
So again, RAG's good for mapping scholarly connections. It can streamline that literature review process a little bit because it's kind of got that nice table to help you make those connections between articles. And the scientific lingo, it can really kind of help define for folks who aren't experts in that area. We'll take a look again real quickly at this example. Okay, let me do a little zoom in. Okay. And again, this is kind of a very foundational base level example of just getting them, familiar with the tool, letting them see how it can help in the research process. it's really helpful, again, if you bring an assignment to a librarian and they can really see, oh, okay, students are struggling here. This is kind of how we can implement this, very simply into what we're doing. So for here, I have them play with the table. I have them look at the overview. I have them, again, that transparency kind of that Shirley asked about, like, well, what level do we want them to tell us they're using it, and what does that look like in an assignment? Like, so I will tell them, this is your research question. What did the overview say? What did the table look like? And then have them kind of think critically about, oh, okay, what were your 3 most useful filters? And why do you think those were useful to you? How are you using those filters to help you build your argument in your paper or your project or the students, whatever the students are doing? Tell me about 2 that weren't useful. Why were they not useful? Maybe they could be useful in a different context. And I do have them, read the article. Like I said earlier, you have to read the article in order to be able to synthesize it. And have them look at, okay, ask it a couple questions, see what it will tell you about the references, the limitations, the conclusions, So again, I think it goes back to that transparency of, yes, these are tools you can use, but we want you to use them in a certain way, in a way that's going to benefit you more than just typing something in and getting it out like Google does. Okay. Ooh, okay. So a couple different models to try. We kind of took a little test drive with SciSpace earlier. Connected papers is, again, good at kind of like having that very neat visual of this is how the papers in this topic or in this field are connecting. But again, it's not getting the entire scholarly landscape, so just keep that in mind. And elicit and consensus are a couple different ones. They look very similar. They're, again, kind of trained based on, ask me a question. What is your research question, right? So just exercise, improve cognition. Okay. And it will do something similar. It will give you the key findings and link in to the scholarly result it's pulling. Okay. And consensus, actually, this is new. This is in beta. I haven't seen this before. So it's giving you kind of an overall, what was the answer to the question that you asked based upon the articles it has access to. So it's saying, yes, exercise does improve cognition according to 80% of the articles that I was able to pull, right? And then the mixed possibly and no. Okay. This one's a little different in that it doesn't quite have the table functionality, but it has other functions. Like it'll tell you this one's highly cited. It also has a chat feature here that you can play with. It'll sometimes tell you what type of article it is, which is helpful if students are specifically asked to find like a meta-analysis or something like that. Right. So that's consensus. Yeah.
Quick question, is Connected Papers using generative AI as well?
I don't hear it. Let me do one real quick. I don't think it does. I think it is mostly RAG because it's literally just looking at how they're connected, unless that's changed. So let me look. So if you click on, okay, this is the one I want, right? And you can look at how that connects. Yeah, so it's just mapping how they're connected. I don't think it's got any other like chat feature, right? Yeah, so it just goes to like the publisher page. It was built more to be about the connections as opposed to like the understanding or how it, how it's laid out.
All
Yeah.
right, Andy's got a great question. Have you
Perfect.
played with Storm from Stanford?
I read an article about Storm, but I've not played with it. Andy, have you played with it?
I've heard good things and I haven't played with it, but Andy, have you used it? She has.
What's it?
Awesome.
All right, tell me more.
Well, I actually made an Instagram post about it. It's and I think that it's really cool, but I think that it has its limitations in terms of it doesn't have all the features that you have mentioned, for example, when it comes to SciSpace, which is amazing. I think the most important part is that it's free, and for students that think that is the most important thing.
Yes.
It has a really interesting conversation table with the AI, which I think that it's interesting because it's not a shallow conversation. Yeah, it really goes deep within the paper or the research that you will be doing, but it does not connect. For
Yeah.
example, other ideas like for what we can see in consensus or connected papers, which is interesting. So it has its pros and cons, like every tool. But all in all, I think that the best thing of it is that also it can write an entire paper that you can study and download, and you can go back and forth and have the conversation with the document as well. So it really helps a lot,
Wow.
at least for the beginning of a research, let's say.
Yeah. No, that's great. I'll have to try that one out. Thank you for sharing that.
Jerry says Storm is pretty mind-blowing. Jerry, do you care to elaborate?
Sure. I mean, what Storm does is it uses agentic AI. So basically, when you have
Oh,
a topic, it creates 4 different agents that are specialists that will do the research for you. So, for example, I was doing research. I'm located in New York, so I was doing research on the impact of the Revolutionary War on New York State, and it created a researcher called a historical researcher. It created an environmental scientist, which is kind of interesting, the impact of the revolution on the forests of New York, which you
wow.
think about, and then a fact checker, and I forget what the fourth one was. But basically, these 4 agents go out and do the research with their specific lens and their specific questions, and then come back together and compile that information to a Wikipedia style document with headings and subheadings and things like that. It really is pretty impressive. When I do AI training, I use it as an example of how agents work in AI, and it is free, as someone mentioned.
Okay.
Uh,
I'll definitely have to play with that.
Jerry, Tim's asking, are they base agents or do you have to create their criteria?
No, unfortunately, the agents are created for you. So you can't, as far as in I used it pretty extensively and I haven't used it in the last month or so, but one of the drawbacks is that it chooses the agents that will go out and do the research for you. So, like I said, environmental scientist wasn't one that I thought really fit the profile. It's kind of an interesting perspective. But as far as you can't tell it, I want these 4 agents. But like I said, 3 of the 4 agents were really, really good. And it also gives you the citations, which is super useful. So you can click on the footnotes in the document, and it'll take you to the website where it got the document from, information from.
Wow. Well,
Thanks,
that'll be
Jerry.
yeah, that'll be one I'll have to play with. Thank you all for sharing that. Okay. Too many windows. Okay. Okay. So what I'm going to have folks do is I did want to kind of give an overview of everything that, the difference in the LLMs, take a look at the research assignments. We've kind of done that walkthrough. You all have got a couple different tools. Thank you all for sharing your experiences. That's really, really helpful because everything changes so fast. So what I'd like for everybody to do is kind of take a couple minutes and we can just do this part in the chat just to kind of get your brain kind of flowing, and then we'll have a little group activity after this. So think about kind of, again, when faculty bring me research assignments, we really look at like, okay, where are your students struggling the most in the research process? And, and a lot of times what I ask them is, what questions do you typically get during the process that are emailed to you over and over and over again? And we kind of start there with, what is the purpose of the assignment or the part of the assignment that you're bringing me? Because a lot of times we scaffold research assignments, which I think is good practice. But that's where we start, purpose and where your student's struggling. So kind of think about where your students struggle and kind of type that in the chat, and we'll have Lisa kind of keep an eye on that. And then in addition to that, kind of based upon what we've talked about today and the things you've seen, is there something that an AI might be able to help with? Or, alternatively, if you could design an AI to help with students with a part of it, what would you have it do?
All right, we've got some responses rolling in. The first one, and probably the most important from my point of view, knowing which sources are trustworthy and which are fake news. That
Yes.
one is tough. Information literacy has been a thing for years now. James says, for students, needed guidance and directions and potential risk of plagiarism.
Yep.
Darcy says, for question 1, my undergrads struggle with narrowing down a topic and creating a research question that is actually researchable and or fits the assignment parameters. They want
Yes.
world peace and they're going to achieve it in their research paper every time. Tim says, business office staff here, so not faculty, trying to find AI to make me better at my functions. My ideal AI would explain the processes that the AI followed to ensure that the student can replicate the processes themselves. Let's see. Aaron says, still need lots of help with paraphrasing and not plagiarism.
Mm.
Shirley says, finding keywords.
We got that, Shirley. We'll talk.
She's got 2 thumbs up and a star on that one. All right. Any others?
Okay. Just a couple questions to keep in mind. And while we kind of shift into our next activity, I'm going to let you all have a little practice with, I've given you basically some student learning outcomes for a research assignment. There's 5 or 6, and I'm going to have Lisa very graciously help me get you all in breakout rooms. And so let me open this up and let you all kind of see what it looks like, and I'll show you how to navigate it a little bit. So these are just kind of some common tasks or learning objectives that students have kind of come across in their research assignments. And so what I'll have you all do, and Lisa can kind of help with the logistics, is you'll just click add and you'll type in, I would add. You can type in your name here. You can type in the name of your group, whatever it is. You can just do name, and you can type, okay, I would add AI here to help keyword brainstorming, or whatever the thing is, based upon whichever idea here that you're gonna kind of have AI tackle. You'll hit publish, and you can move these. So you can just drag it to, okay, this is the one that I'm gonna work on. Okay. And Lisa, I'll let you go ahead and do the fancy part of that.
All right, so I have created some breakout rooms, so make sure you're in the Padlet. I will just announce that link once you guys are in the breakout rooms. How long did you want to take on this, Britt? You want to do 15 minutes, 20 minutes?
Let's shoot for 15. Let people have some
Okay.
time to really kind of look. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So I have created the breakout rooms, and you all are free to navigate to them.
Okay, so it looks like you all got to play in here a little bit. A couple people did ChatGPT. Somebody tried out Storm. Real quick, I know we've only got about 15 minutes. Does anybody want to kind of come off mute and talk about, how that felt to think about, how can I add an AI into, kind of a piece of research, or what you all talked about in your groups? I know Lisa mentioned a lot of good side conversations going on, and I think that's important in this space where everything changes constantly.
Yemi and I played in Perplexity, and
Oh.
we played with question number 1, and it was kind of fun because we had Perplexity develop our what was that? Our research question, and we were looking at test anxiety and pharmacological treatment. And
Oh.
how's that for a fun one? And one scoping review came up, and then the other one that came up was a really good study that essentially said it was a RCT, so it had a decent type of study. I didn't check them out to see if they were really valid or not, but they look good.
Okay.
Yummy. I don't know. Add in there anything I missed.
Oh, you got it.
Anybody else want to share, or any burning questions or discussion topics? We've got a little time left.
I'm sorry, has there been any consensus on how we're going to cite different AI usage?
Not that I have seen. No, is the short answer. I'm
Yeah.
gonna let Lisa answer this one.
Yeah, there are a couple of discipline-specific guidelines, primarily the APA and the MLA. The MLA has a task force looking into this, but beyond that, we don't have any discipline-specific guidelines.
Yeah.
Darcy, do you want to add to that?
I was gonna say the same thing, that MLA and APA have issued guidelines. They're on their official websites now, but this is all very much emerging. And in general, it's a preference to cite when you've used AI, whether in an appendix or otherwise. And I think this is really crucial for information literacy training and scholarship, that we as a community have some consensus around how to cite.
Yeah, just going off, because I primarily focus on using Copilot because, we use Microsoft. And I'm going to use the tools that are most likely going to be the tools that get put into my toolbox as opposed to the ones that I use at home. But when using Copilot, it gives me links to the resources that Copilot used. Is that incorporated into the citations that APA and MLA have been using? I guess I need to research these MLA and APA things.
I don't know if it goes that, does it go that granular? I don't know.
I don't know that it does.
I don't think it does.
Because I think the point in like Copilot is it's giving you the resources that you could get further information about. Like, why not just use that as part of the citation itself? Because it's going to be different every citation, right? Like every use of AI it's going to yield different results. So if you identify the resources that are used by the AI platform that you're using in that particular prompt, then it seems like you already have your resources. Like,
Yeah.
I think we overcomplicate this stuff because it's new.
I mean, I would.
I as a librarian with a composition background, I think it depends on what you do and how you interact with those resources, because we're getting into kind of ethical areas of citing something that you didn't interact with firsthand, right? So that like starts pushing us towards like the guidelines for citing citing sources cited in an article as quoted in. So I think that is a separate issue altogether, right? So that's, did you go interact with those sources? Then yes, you can cite them, but citing them without interacting with them is problematic. And citing just them doesn't speak to the way you use AI.
Citing just them? What do you mean?
I thought that part of what you were saying was citing the sources that AI suggests to you eliminates the need to cite AI.
That's not what I was saying at all.
Gotcha.
My statement, my thought process on this, you initially cite in whatever format you're going to use in the citation, generated by Copilot, AI. And then Copilot lists, usually when I do ask Copilot a question, when we're having a deep conversation, it usually lists out 1, 2, 3 to 12 resources that it used. And those are actual links. So use AI, link those links in a single citation. You got all those links. I know it makes for a long citation, but that's the only way that I could see that you're legitimately getting a specific citation for that specific question, because ultimately you're asking an individual to use their knowledge base to give you an answer to a question that you have. I mean, you gotta cite it because it's not your information.
Darcy has provided 2 links for AI citation in MLA and APA, and Neha also provided a nice library guide. So I would encourage you to take a look at those links. John, what would you like?
Definitely, thank you.
I'm sorry, I was just going to suggest that we think about the analogy to Google. you would expect a student to go and look at the actual sources, but not say discovered by Google.
Right. It's comparable, in my mind at least.
I don't think it is.
John, I put almost the same thing in the chat. I'm thinking exactly the same thing. If you're searching on a search engine, we don't say I searched it on Google. We say where we actually found it. And I wonder if citations will have to have a rethink about if you're using ChatGPT. Is that like if you interviewed somebody? Is that particularly,
Yeah,
is
I
that
think
part
it
of your
is.
research? It is. I think so too, but I don't think it's the same. Like I wouldn't say that I use ChatGPT. I would say this list of articles was generated by ChatGPT and then reviewed and curated by myself or whatever. I think that's kind of how I would work on it, because I want students to really think about the credit rather than, because we're all doing, I mean, none of us are going back into the card catalog, but we didn't ever say like I took out a card, right? Like we said whatever the actual source was, and I just wonder like how do we break that down with this added layer of what feels like a person, but it's not, right?
I beg to differ. I'm joking. I'm sorry.
Please explain. I don't.
No, it's
I'm here
making
to fight it.
choices
I'm just
based
kidding.
on information. Like they're going to be different depending on the mood of your AI at the time. Like that's why we timestamp when we take a quote from someone, because that point in time, that person felt that way. 10 minutes later, that person's going to feel different. With AI, at that time, AI felt that way. But AI is growing exponentially every single day, likely, maybe some AIs, who knows? AI's responses are going to be different at each moment in time because it uses a different database.
Absolutely. And I would say somebody had mentioned something like, I very much believe in free speech. I very much believe in free speech for humans. I do not believe in free speech for AI. And I think that's kind of where we need to place ourselves, because otherwise we're going to end up in the Terminator. Like I'm a little bit concerned.
Please know your AI, please and thank you, right?
Right. I mean, for sure. My daughter already says, Siri, please find XYZ. And I'm like, what are you doing? My husband, we both work in IT and we don't have any smart anything at home, because we know that there's things that it's collecting and data that it's mining that we don't even know. And we don't want that in our household. And so when we think about AI, I think even just the phrase AI thinks this now and AI thinks this later, it doesn't think, right? It's not sentient. And I think making sure that we're clear about that with kids and with students and with adults, to be perfectly honest, because otherwise we are going to end up in the Terminator. I'll stop talking.
I think that's just going a little farther than we need to go down this. I mean, we shouldn't worry about AI becoming sentient. Because we're the ones who define what sentience is, right? Like, it's not human, right? But it doesn't mean
yes.
Like it follows our sentience.
But so many people think it is.
I mean, I talk to it. I have deep conversations with AI that I can't have with humans, with non-AIs.
Well, and I want to point out that Claire made a really good point here. She says that I would lean on the side of over reflection and over explanation in this moment, just because we need to have this conversation collectively and be clear about how and why we're approaching AI in the way that we do. I think that's really where we're at. It's so new. We need to talk about how are we using it? Are we using it effectively? And how does it compare to traditional methods of conducting research?
I'm sorry. I like to beat the drums.
Go ahead.
Like, I want to treat AI like a person, because it makes decisions that aren't basic. They're not just using the database. It's actually, I don't know, using a thought process and not just pulling data. Right? I mean,
All right, I'll
I
take
don't
a
see it that
stab.
way.
I'll take a stab at that.
Go.
I feel like the claims that we have sentience and intelligence in the human sense are overblown, and the claims that you just have stochastic repetition are also incorrect. What we're finding is that these large language models, by doing a lot of statistics, are really good at simulating language. And as the sort of godfather of AI, Geoffrey Hinton, says, if you want to make something that's really, really, really good at simulating language, it has to also simulate understanding. And that means the ability to generate information or insights that weren't there originally. Now, my own opinion about it is that the generative AI is good at finding, either summarizing existing information, that is finding sort of the average of data that's already in its training data, or sometimes finding something new that happens to be between data points that were not originally connected. So you've all seen, like, write a sonnet about the IRS tax code, or give me a rom-com, script for quantum mechanics or something like that. Well, wow, it's so brilliant. Well, what it's doing is taking things that are not together in the training data, but happen to exist in the training data, and finding essentially a sort of midpoint between them. So if we think about the kind of intelligence it exhibits as this kind of synthetic kind of creativity, as opposed to some of the kinds of creativity that humans can sometimes exhibit that might not fit in that category, then I guess, yes, we can say that it is generative beyond simply replicating what's in its data.
This has been a fascinating discussion, and I think we could go all day, but we are at time. Brittany, did you want to close with any parting thoughts?
No, I just want to thank you all for being here and being open to talking about it and researching and sharing what you all are looking into. And I definitely learned something myself today, so I appreciate you all. Thank you all for spending some time with us today.
Yes, thank you all. And I will send out that link to the recording and the resources later today, and hope to see you at our next workshop and/or lecture. Thanks, everybody.